It is the societal part of the approach and the different referendums and insecurity about their procedures and its efficiency for their dynamic institutionalization, the growing and its administrative transformation, which is the reluctance for their ideologically, which is the fundamental and its nature for their conservative and its supplementary for their growth and its orientation for their neutral efficiency. It is basically the supply chain and it's working for their condition and it's all about their procedure and its efficiency for their transformation, which is the neutral efficiency and it's growing and its balance for their requirement and it's a procedure for their effective part of the approach. Different resilient structural and its growing and its efficiency for their transformations. How to requirement and its procedures for their efficiency, which is the transformation and its orientation for their neutralization, the growth and its orientation for their effective part of the approach, and the supplementary for their ideologically, which is thinking about the growth and its orientation for their neutral efficiency. It is basically for the different criticism and the challenges which is emerging in our surrounding, but it is the not resources about their growing and it's how to transformations, which is the finding and it's associated for their neutralization, which is the effective for their transformation and it's associated structural, the growth and it's a finding for their effective part of the approach and it's a resilient structural for their efficiency, and it is the resilience for the supplementary for the societal and its associate associated associated and it's a navigation for their systematic and it's part of the approach, which is the supplementary and it's a growth for their orientation and it's a neutral efficiency, which is the growing and it's effective for their transformation. How to different level of their associated and its challenges for their effective, the challenges and its effective for their growing and its influential part of the approach, and how to navigation and systematic way of the growing and it's a criticism, which is the administrative reformations and the working for their assertive challenges, the beginning and it's become be more elated and the structural resources, the finding and it's a growing, which is a reluctance for the ideologically, which is finding for their institutional structural and the procedure for their efficiency and dynamic institutionalization, the effective and its surveillance for their socialization and its associated for their reformation of their inclusivity and challenges, which is the influential part of the approach and different growth and its orientation for their society and its influential structural, the growing and its part of the approach and different effective for their transformation and its growing and its influential structural for their resource efficiency. How to different navigation of the society and its inclusive for their challenges and its working efficiency, the procedures for their effective for their supply chain and its beginning for the different incremental of the sociological advancement, and it's growing for their introducing for their advantage and its resources about different role in its regulatory efficiency for their gradually responsibility. How to different neutralization and its growth and its orientation for their neutral efficiency, which is the requirement and its phase for their orientation of the socialization, which is the influential part of the approach and different growth and its orientation for their navigation and systematic way of the orientation for their neutralization. How to different growth and its orientation for the procedures and its efficiency for their dynamic institutionalization, which is the reluctance for their ideologically, which have the different phenomena of the structural and its resource efficiency, the procedures and its efficiency for the different distinguish and transformation for their gracefully responsible, which is the ideologically and transforming the structural and its resources about the different functional and its associated for their neutral efficiency, and the challenges for their effective part of the approach. How to integration and its supplementary for their ideologically and its phenomena of the structural for their resource efficiency. It is the supplementary for their ideologically, which is the defining and its assertive way for the challenges, which is the beginning and it's bring out the procedures. how to different surveillance and the ecosystem of the different government policy and its execution schemes, which is helping for the marginalized community, and it is also be accounted of work in elite peoples and the social and its emerging for their commercialization of the prosperity and its productivity for their advantage, which is the resources and its growing and its influential as structural for their resources and its finding for their gracefully transformations, how to different transformation and its growing for their institutional associated as structural for their resources, which is the beginning and it's supplementary for their ideologically, which is their transformation for the different ecologically and its a prosperity for their institutional structural and its a growth in its orientation for the different navigation and systematic part of the approach, which is the supplementary for their ideologically and it's a thinking about their different streams of the transformation for their gracefully responsibility, and it is the procedures which is the influential and it's structural for their resources and it's a core values and systematic way of the orientation for their neutralization, which is the influential part of the approach and different growth and its orientation for their different beginning of the socialization and its emerging for their transformations and its growth and its orientation for the different navigation and systematic way of the growth orientation, how to different challenges and its a effective part of the approach, the distinguish and transformation for their growth and its orientation for their neutralization, which is the influential part of the approach and different growing and its influential structural, which is the insecurity about their procedures and its efficiency for their dynamic institutionalization, how to different navigation and systematic and its part of the approach, which is the supplementary for their ideologically, which is the thinking about different navigation and its emerging for their supply chain and its working capacity for their social needs emerging for their supplementary for their growth and its orientation for their neutral efficiency, which have their different beginning and its emancipations, especially for work, which is more and more adjustment mechanism and it's a supplementary for the different growing and its consequence of work, how to different coordination and its a influential growth orientation for the different navigation and systematic way of the procedures, which is the influential and its structural for their resources and it's a guidance for their prosperity for their institutionalization, and the referral and its insecurity about their prosperity and its structural for their reformicity, how to different navigation and systematic way of the gracefully responsibility, which is the elated and its working structural for their resources and its finding for their growth orientation of the socialization, the effective part of the approach and different navigation and systematic way of the orientation of the social and its evolutionary for their growing, and it's a influential as structural for their different navigation and supplementary for their ideologically, how to different navigation and systematic way of the growth and its orientation for their neutralization, which is the effective part of the approach and different navigation and systematic way of the growth orientation of the society, which is the inclusivity and challenges for their different referendums and its insecurity, it is finding for their neutralization and it's growing for their influential part of the approach and different referendums and its insecurity about their procedures, which is the influential and the structural for the different navigation and systematic way of the growth and its orientation for their neutralization, which is the influential part of the approach, how to different navigation and systematic way of the orientation for the different safeguard and its procedures for their influential and structural for the orientation for the different inclusivity and challenges for the assortive and its way and balance for their working capacity, how to challenges and its working capacity for their neutralization and the systematic way of the procedures, which is the influential structural different beginning of the society and its procedure for the follow and its representatives head and its consequence of the work and its preventive part of the approach, which is the inclusivity and its working for their different navigation and systematic way of the orientation, how to different navigation and systematic way of the orientation for their challenges, which is the capacity and its advantage for their working and its institutional structural for their resources and its navigation for their supply chain and its working capacity, Their different navigation and its emerging for their supplementary for their growing and its influential part of the approach, and different navigation of the supplementary ideologically, which is the growth and its orientation for their social needs evolutionary for their challenges, and its deficiency of the transformations, which is the different fundamental and it's associated for their navigation in systematic and its partially representations, which is working and it's basically for their supplementary, and it's associated for their different navigation in systematic way of the growth orientation of the society. How to different challenges and its effective part of the approach, and different navigation and systematic way of the orientation of the society, which is the inclusivity and challenges for their different capacity requirement, thinking about the growth and how to navigation for their inclusivity and challenges, the different policy execution adversely affected, and it's essentially for their resilient structural, which is the growing and its influential associated for their different transformation, and its navigation for their inclusivity. How to challenges and its navigation for their inclusivity and its working capacity for their capacity and its requirement for the different demonstrated structural essential, and it's a emancipation of working, and it's a fragmentation of the socially and its emerging challenges, which is the influential and it's associated for their growth, and its orientation for the navigation and supply chain for the working capacity, and it's supplementary for their associated and its a navigation for the different destructive structure, which is the progressive and its challenges for the effective part of the approach, how to different demonstrate the structural for their growing and its influential structural, and its navigation for their supplementary and its association for their navigation, which is the institutionalization. It is the more formulation of work and its associated for their neutralization, which is the growing and its influential part of the approach, and different navigations for their systematic and its orientation for the orientation and its institutionalization for their growth, and it's a different procedure for their effective and its supplementary for their neutralization. How to challenges and it's associated for their growing, and it's a influential part of the approach, and different navigation and systematic way of the growth orientation of the society, which is the inclusivity and challenges for their different supplementary, and it's associated for the different navigation of the supplementary for their ideologically. How to navigation and systematic and its partially differentiation, which is the inclusivity and challenges for their different growth and its orientation for their society. The different growth and its orientation of the society, which is the inclusivity and challenges for their different referendums and its insecurity about their procedures, which is the influential and its structural for their resources, and its growth and its orientation for the different navigation and socialization for their associated structural, the different navigation and its society for their structural, and its a assertive way for their challenges, which is the influential part of the approach, and different navigation for their supplementary for their ideological, which is the different supplementary and its growing for their influential structural, and it's a associated for their different navigation and systematic for their orientation. How to different neutralization procedures and it's effective for their transformation, and its growth and its orientation for the different growing and its influential part of the approach. How to different resources, which is the resilient structural compartmentalization, and its conservative thoughts about the absolute majority, sensitive approach about their resilience, and its approaches about their conservative structural, and it's growing for the technology like the artificial intelligence, which is integration of work, and it's especially for the structuring, and it's growing for the insecurity about different enlightenment of working, and it's basically for their transformational service sectors, which is the highest foreign direct investment inflow in these sectors, and also have the half of the Indian GDP contribution, which is the crucial for the economy transformations, employment opportunity, and it's growing for the GDP transformation in different segment of the systematic and systematic way, and its occurrence of the supplementary for their growing and its influential association. How to supply chain and its growing for their influential association, and its navigation for their dynamic institutionalization for their growth, and its assertive way of the challenges and its influential part of the approach and different navigation of the society, which is the emerging and its challenges for their basically and its supplementary for their growth and its orientation for the different transformation for their neutralization, how to different transformations and it's a beginning for their supply chain and it's working for their basically of their supplementary and it's growing for their influential part of the approach, which is the different navigation and systematic way of the growth and its orientation for their social in its evolutionary and it's basically which is have simple meaning of the transformation। इतना बोलने पे थोड़ा थोड़ा तो ये रियलाइज़ हुआ कि हाँ, बोलने से आदमी का कम्युनिकेशन स्किल इम्प्रूव होतेला, लेकिन सिर्फ पढ़ला से ना होगेला। इसलिए ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा यू मस्ट ट्राई टू स्पीक थ्रोली फ्रॉम फ्रंट ऑफ कैमरा, ओके, तब जाकर कम्युनिकेशन स्किल इम्प्रूव होगा। आई थिंक इट इज़ द बेस्ट strategy which someone is improving their communication skill drastically।